This one? Oh, close it. Do you want me to pause it or?
No, you can unpause the recording. Start here shortly.
Okay.
I got one yesterday.
I got one 14 months ago.
Not really. We don't have the right tools.
We looked at you didn't tell us what.
Yeah, if you look up close at it, you know, there's like hairs. But I'm about to get it ready. I called them out. This time I'm gonna call the town of Norfolk Square Board of Commissioners regular meeting to order. If you would please stand, I'm gonna lead the city communication. Pete, you would please say, okay? Thank you. Let us pray. Our most gracious Heavenly Father, Lord, we come to you as humbly as we know how, just lifting up your holy name and praising your holy name, and thank you, God, for all that you do for us, bless and provide and bestow upon us as individuals and as leaders of the town. And Lord, we just lift up our citizens also. Lord, just pray a special blessing upon each and every one. Lord, we know there's a lot of sickness and heartache, stress that people are going through right now. I ask that you would just be near and dear to those concerns. Have one myself, Lord, in my own family, and I just pray that you just be with my sister's family. They're going through a terrible time right now. I thank you for what you're doing. Comfort them and give them strength as they go through the rest of the days. Lord, now on behalf of the rest of our community throughout here, the state, the country, Lord, we ask that you would just help our leaders to see that with your leadership and with working together with kindness and love and appreciation for each other's decisions, each other's thoughts, and it might be for the betterment of our country, our state, our county, and our towns. Forgive us now, Lord, wherein we fail thee, and ask always, Lord, in Jesus' holy name. Amen. Face the flag, please. To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please be seated. Okay. That gets us down to item number 4, additions and deletions to the agenda. I believe you said that's what we need to look at.
Yes, sir. We do have a handful of additions. The first, I'll ask that we do at the beginning of the policy section before the public hearing. So I'm going to call it D1. Many versus act exemption for preliminary water system study.
Actually, I can't hear you.
Can't hear me? Okay. I'm adding D1 at the beginning of the policy section. It's in your packet of materials that were on your desk. It looks like this. That's one addition. The second addition is that Meredith and I will have a presentation during the manager's report. That's a follow-up to an agenda item we dealt with in March. And then finally, we will have a closed session. Those are my additions made. These are additions to the agenda, but we do have a package of information on your table that includes the budget presentation that I said I was going to hand out to you tonight on Friday, and some additional information on some of the other agenda items for tonight. So quite a healthy stack of supplementary information for your considerations.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, make a motion, we accept the agenda as stated with the additions that were given to us by the town manager.
Thank you, Michael. Need a second, please.
Second.
Thank you, Debbie. Motion in second. All those in favor, signify by stating aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign, opposed, motion carries. That gets us down to public comments. And, have any?
If there's anyone online who'd like to make a general public comment, please raise your hand for Meredith to see. Anybody? Don't have any online. That's okay.
All right, we'll go along to item number 7, consent agenda. And that consists of approval of minutes, last legislative meeting, budget amendment action, street closing resolution. Okay.
Mr. Mayor, I make a motion that we accept the consent agenda as stated.
Second. Motion and second. Any other questions or comments? Okay, there being none, all those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign, and opposed, motion carries. Okay. Item number 8. This is the one that Wilson was referring to, and manager and / attorney's report, not meant to be Wilson and Meredith, is that correct?
Yes, sir. So if you'll recall, back at our March regular meeting, we heard a rezoning request for a property in the ETJ on Fair Plains Road. They were asking to be rezoned to a business zoning category. And the facts on the ground, in my opinion, probably would have been adequate enough to grant that rezoning, but they claim to have been rezoned in the past to that particular business zoning. And at the time, we didn't think that was the case because it didn't show up like that on our records that we use the most. But Meredith did a deeper dive and found out some information that we're going to share with you tonight about the status of that rezoning. And Meredith, if that's not the correct facts, please correct me.
No, that is. So in your packet, you will find that we've got, first of all, I've got 2 letters, both to the property owner and then also the adjacent property owners that were originally notified of the rezoning application, which is the 3rd page. And if we keep going, we've got the original ordinance amendment from 1982, where this property was rezoned. And the complete application, the newspaper ad, the minutes. So somehow so what the chain of events I have found is 1982, the property was rezoned. In 1985, they built the structure and opened the barber shop. In 1986, the zoning map was showing this as being neighborhood business. Now, from 1986 to 2006, the records got a little spottier, and we searched the minutes and we searched all the files that we had available, and there was no change in zoning on this property. So my hypothesis is when we went from a paper map source to a digital map source, it was lost because it was such a small parcel within a sea of residential. So based on this evidence, the property has been zoned neighborhood business for many years. And it was a clerical error on our part. So We've updated the zoning map, we've notified everyone, and wanted to bring this back to you all as an update. And if you got any questions, please let me know.
Wilson, do we need to take any other action other than what the report?
No, sir.
Thank you. I'm glad we got that squared away. That's
Yes,
something that seemed to be bothering us so in that area. So
yes, I'm sure the neighbors weren't thrilled, but I could get in contact and Bethany's gonna call us and explain the situation to them.
And you got
receipt,
yeah.
and we got the receipt.
We refunded them.
Yes, we did.
Yes, sir. The whole house instead of the mistake.
Meredith, I commend you for the work you did. That took quite a bit of research. I'm sure. to
It
get
goes
done.
way back, it did. It goes way back.
Yeah, we went back to like 1967, I want to say.
Chuck off.
And I-
Okay. All right, move right along. Call for public hearing on Town Code Chapter 16.
Excuse me, Mayor, we have the additional item, the water study item.
Okay, excuse me.
So I'll refer you all to this document. That's right. So one of the priorities that you identified and that we talked about at our retreat, but also at the budget workshop, was a water study to study the two towns' water systems and what it would take to safely and economically combine those systems. We'll talk a little bit more about this project as one of the projects in the supplemental spending plan later on. But one of the things about those projects is that they'll all move in different calendars. One of them we can do right away, some of them we have to do some preliminary work, some of them we have to do some preliminary work and then make some more decisions. And so they'll all move on different timetables, but this one's ready to start now. And this action tonight is essentially a procedural step that we need to do in order to get that study started. So, state statute requires that certain types of engineering contracts, and contracts with professional, industries like architects, engineers, surveyors, construction managers, et cetera, be procured using a qualification-based system. And so you don't choose your vendor based on the lowest price. You choose a vendor based on their qualifications and their ability to do the job. And that would apply in this case. However, the state statute also permits towns to be, municipalities to be exempt from that requirement if the project is under $50,000. And the study to see what's required to combine the town system will be less than $50,000. We're going to be the party to the contract just because, you know, it's our issue. We've been reading it, we brought it up. Wilkesboro will fund half of whatever the final cost is. But we'll be the party of record on the contract. So I'm asking you tonight to pass a resolution exempting us from the Mini Brooks Act, North Carolina General Statute 143-64.31, so that we can negotiate with possible contractors to perform the study. There is a sort of leader in the clubhouse, there is a favorite right now. But I need you all to pass this exception so that we can move forward with the contract.
Okay. It says I need a motion for the Mini Brook expansion.
Mayor, I make a motion that we adopt a resolution exempting the town from North Carolina General Statute 143-64.31, the Mini Brooks Act, for procedures outlined in North Carolina General Statute 143-64.32, and authorizing the town manager to negotiate the next contract for water system study with the chosen firm.
Okay. Motion, I need a second. Thank you. Any discussion or questions before we vote? All right, there being none, all those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those like sign, none opposed. Motion carries. Okay, Wilson, next up.
Okay, I'll throw this one over to Meredith. We've also got Phil and Kelly and Bob here to answer any questions that you have.
Okay, so we're fortunate to have Phil and Kelly here tonight to guide us through this process and also answer any policy questions that we may have. Before you, you've got a public hearing for the zoning ordinance and then also town code chapters 1 and 2. I will make note that the newspaper ad, we did have a typo in it, so we just want to clarify that this is the zoning ordinance. It's actually been pulled from the town code, and it's not a town code chapter. So that means we'll have two ordinances that are separate from our town code that we will be reviewing and adopting before July 1st. The other one is the wireless cell phone, the wireless communications ordinance. In your agenda packet, you've got the planning board recommendation for all three of these items. And then finally, I have put together a consistency statement for tonight based on each chapter or an ordinance that you would definitely want to read with your motion. And what's underlined are the motion options. As you see, we've got edited, if we decide to change something, or if you would wish to table these items. The final page is a policy choice that we will need to discuss. We've got a few of them for our zoning ordinance as well as chapter 2 administration. Bill, Kelly, did you guys have anything you wanted to add before we start a discussion?
I don't, again, there's a question.
Nothing point of order, we need to probably move to open.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Mayor, we can declare this into.
I will just, okay. This time I declare us into a public hearing and open the floor for any discussion on this subject. There be any?
I don't think you have any participants so far for this item. So if you all would like to start with the policy discussion, which is the last page of this agenda item. So one of the things we discussed is the makeup of our boards, our advisory boards that are for the zoning ordinance and also chapter 2. So that is our planning board and our board of adjustment. What we need to do is we need to make sure we have equal representation of both town limits as well as our ETJ members. So we're going to have to have an even board because we have about even population. So we can either have 6 members or we can have 8 members. The planning board recommended 8 members, but that is up to you all to make a final policy choice. So that's the first policy item discussion.
I think 6 members would be preferable to 8 members because it can be difficult to find people willing to participate.
Thank you, Debbie. I was going to reiterate that. Thanks for that comment. It is difficult to get people served, but 6 would probably be easier than 8.
If there was a need for 8, we put 8 in place.
Yes, so this is a policy choice. We just have to make sure we have equal representation for both ETJ and town limits. So that may change the current makeup of both boards. I think they're currently both a little heavy with town residents versus ETJ memberships.
So how many would come out of ATJ?
Well, if you do 6, it would be 3.
3?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Maybe how many times be out of it? Mayor, how many times we handled in a even split board?
So that was something Bill and I talked about a lot, because what happens is you would have a motion, you would have a vote, and then the motion would die. And you would probably do that several times before we got something decided upon, so. Unfortunately, that's the nature of having an even board versus an odd board, like we have now. So that was the only downside with this change.
I don't think there are many situations where they are.
Not currently with this board, I've seen it other places I've worked, but I mean, it just depends on the board members and what items they're hearing.
So we need a motion to,
Well, we got a few more, but if you guys want to just tell me which you prefer to do 6
you
members.
want to do a motion on this one, or you want to wait, do a motion for all?
We could do it all at the end, and we can
Okay.
say it as edited, and we can list out.
All right.
Okay,
Thank you.
okay, so we're thinking 6 members for Board of Adjustment and for Planning Board, correct?
Why did the planning board want 8?
Just so we didn't have to get rid of people.
I felt like that finding people might be an issue too.
For sure.
Well, right now, as the current makeup, you would only have to add 1 ETJ member. Because the current makeup already has 4 Israels sitting on the board. So you're really only looking to find, it's always had 4 in-town members, and it's always been easier to find the in-town members than the ETJ. So, you know, if you adopt a 6-6, I mean, the 3-3 policy, then, you know, you're just gonna have to ask an in-town person to, you know, step down. Because we currently have 3 ETJs, I believe, correct? Correct. So, you know, it's either try to find an extra ETJ person or ask an in-town person to step down. So
Do you think
it would be better
Which would you prefer?
Well, I agree with you, Debbie. It's always harder, like my experience was, it's always harder to find ETJ members. Just because you're recruiting from a, you know, it's not the same recruit ability. I don't know that, I mean, I know all the current members of the planning board, and so, I mean, personally, I would hate to see any of the in-town members have to step down because they perform their task very well, in my opinion. But I mean, I'm going to be like this on that. I mean, I'm not sold one way or the other. I just, you know, if you were asking me to personally, I would like to see the 4-4, just because I think the extra person would be more insightful over decision processes. But that's only personal, nothing concrete. The rest of you said 3-3. I'm good with 3-3.
Can we do 4-4, and, if we have open seats, work people in?
Yes.
It's not an immediate.
Yes, I'll say we still have a vacant seat on the Board of Adjustment in our ETJ. So we're kind of built.
I'd like to probably see 8, based on our past experiences where our board members had to make decisions. I like the 8.
Well, 8 would give you a little leeway if someone were absent. You still have good input. On the 3 come out for.
Quorum with 6 would be 4, correct? And a quorum with 8 would be 5. So you have to look at it in terms of, so you're only talking about 1 extra person needed for a quorum, even if you had 8.
It gives you a little more input. 5 people versus.
But like I said, I'm not advocating one way or the other. I would just, you know,
Maybe we ought to sticker thumbs up.
Okay, we can move to the next one, circle back if you want to think about it for a few minutes.
Well, I'm okay with Dave.
I'm also okay with that.
All right.
So keep that one as is. The next policy decision was under Article 4. Essentially what happened with this item was violation claims. At the end of the chapter, there was essentially, the zoning administrator would decide if they would be enforcing the violation. And essentially they could throw it out. I felt like that was a very big conflict of interest. This item has nothing to do with 160B. We noticed it, John and I noticed it when we were going through violation policies. And, we originally talked about maybe having the board of commissioners, maybe the manager. And at the end of the day, I don't believe any of the other codes had this option. So it would be simpler to strike it. And that way, if you have a violation, you enforce it, there's no get out option. So it makes it a stronger enforcement policy as well. But that's also a decision of the board.
How often does that happen?
Okay, I haven't seen it with zoning yet, but we had it with the nuisance.
So what happens if you don't have anybody now?
Well, I was gonna say, it's essentially, and Danny could help me with this, if you don't have anyone to give reprieve and you have to go to court over it, that would be the next course of action, because you don't have any option of throwing out the violation essentially.
That's correct.
What was the planning board's recommendation on this?
They were pretty good with any of them. The last one we talked about, I had it struck and they didn't seem to mind it.
May I ask what Phil and Kelly's thoughts are on this?
I feel it puts Aaron in a very awkward situation, having to wait for them.
And how would most communities decide handle that?
They're going to be the comparable section.
They don't have this sort of.
Yeah, it kind of compromises your enforcement if you have a get out of jail card at the end of it. Because then that puts you in a very ethical situation too, where you're trying to enforce something, and then there's this clause of pressure for the disposition to have to essentially throw it out.
So there are no teeth.
Potentially, yeah.
What if our town attorney does it?
That's you guys. I think that was the course of action went with the nuisance, because he was threatening to sue, and we got Gary involved and sat down and mediated the situation. So that's what that item escalated to, and he came and spoke to you all, and we figured it out, and we sat down and we figured it out. There wasn't a, get out of jail card for him, essentially. You had to either comply or we were going to court.
I think that would be acceptable.
If it's acceptable to the board, yes.
That would be my recommendation.
So to clarify, would you like to see it struck, or would you like to see the town attorney settle claims?
I'd like to see the town attorney say.
I would.
Town attorney, okay. Is that a reasonable case?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
And hopefully they don't get that far, but that's an option if they do. Okay. The next item is under Article 6. This was that we're calling these provisional use permits. The general statute said we can no longer do special use permits, conditional use permits. They all have to be special use permits. So to differentiate which board is hearing which quasi-judicial item, we come up with the language provisional use permits. And those two items would be for the board of commissioners to airport, or also ground floor residential in our central business district. So the options are, we can keep it with the board of commissioners and call these provisional use permits, or we can send these to the board of adjustment and call them a special use permit.
I would say send it to the Board of Adjustments, call them provisional use permits. Did I get that?
So they would only have to be called provisional use permits if the board of commissioners heard the item. Because we have to differentiate which board is doing which. What it used to be was all conditional use permits were held by the board of adjustment, and all special use permits were held by the board of commissioners. The legislation said we can't use those languages anymore. So that's, we're essentially just swapping out verbiage. Unless you choose to send everything to the board of adjustment.
What were the two things, this is about the airport and the ground level thing?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I want to send it all to Board of Adjustments, not the.
I would like to keep that as well.
I agree as well.
I still think the ground floor thing should have been written to start with, to go to the board of adjustment. I still haven't figured out how that ended up in our lane, so I'm definitely agree with you.
Okay, so what we'll do is we will no longer have what's called a provisional use permit proposal. Everything will be a special use permit, and the board of adjustment will hear all special use permits, which is the quasi judicial hearing. So those are the three big policy choices for us to decide on the zoning ordinance. Did you all have anything else you wanted to discuss with the way it's written or formatted, or anything else pop out?
So we need to discuss the cluster development.
That will be, that's kind of a two-pronged situation. You will discuss it with the subdivision ordinance with the next, we have that in the next few items. That is already there. And then we had a proposed text amendment to do a different type of cluster development, which I've asked to table until we get through all of these major text amendments.
Okay.
Bill Kelly, did you have any other final words on these items?
I'd like to thank Bill and Kelly for being here.
I'll say thank you, they were instrumental in this update.
My only question that I had when I went through the agenda is the part, and I get confused on a lot of this, is thinking about the criminal punishment.
Yes.
So they said they're trying to decriminalize some of that stuff.
Last I heard, I think it's either in the House or the Senate. So it'll be up to the state legislators to do that.
So there's actually an update to that. So, that legislation has been amended significantly, essentially to permit municipalities to keep most of their criminal ordinances. And there are some exceptions, and I don't know whether this falls under one of the exceptions or not, but by and large, most of the criminal ordinances that we have before will get to keep. And I'll bring you some more information back on that as it makes its way through the general assembly.
And that's the end of it.
I think so, yes.
And then the only other thing I will note for the zoning ordinance is I will be bringing back to you the floodplain section. I've spoken with the state. They said we needed to add a whole bunch of stuff. So I'm going to work very diligently to get that in quickly so we can make the July 1st deadline.
Okay, we need to take any kind of action
Yes, if you,
now, what you reported.
yes, because we'll go over the next few chapters separately.
Okay.
If you go back a page, there There's a motion and a consistency statement. And unfortunately, you have to read the whole thing. Now, one of the changes of 160D is that it will be paraphrased, which will be a lot easier.
Yeah, got to go. All right, I want to first out of the closed session and call for a motion. To approve, please.
So Mayor, I assume that, the motion states like in the first one, chapter one, pretty much reading verbatim.
Yes, but I've got it for the zoning ordinance, it's the third one.
So the zoning ordinance is the motion that you need right now.
Yes, sir, and we'll go through chapters 1 and 2 next.
I'm okay. All right, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion concerning the zoning ordinance that the Board of Commissioner moves to approve the edits as presented.
So it would be changed after tonight. Since we made those policy choices.
All right, so I'm in that edit that's changed. The town's zoning ordinance, the town of North Wilkesboro deems the proposed amendments to be consistent with the town of North Wilkesboro's comprehensive plan dated June 5th, 2018, and any other applicable plans. The proposed amendments are supportive of the following plans purposes: establish the legal foundation for zoning and subdivision changes, guide future land use related regulations, and provide predictability for private sector development. Proposed text amendments are reasonable and in the public interest because it supports the adopted comprehensive plan.
You heard the motion, I need a second, please.
Second.
Motion and second. Are there any other questions? Comments, anybody needs to make this time? If not, all those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those like sign, motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll jump back to Town Code Chapter 1 and Town Code Chapter 2. We feel excited off. That's back up the mountain, so thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
All your hard work.
Thank you.
Chapter 1 is mostly focused on the day makeup. That is where we had to amend it mostly for essentially reference for 160B going to 168. So very minor changes, no policy, nothing major. Chapter 2, the administration, there is one policy change. We've already discussed it, decided based on the makeup of the planning board. That would be, you would have 8 members instead of 7. And we just need to make sure those two match, since they are hand in hand with each other. So chapter 2, administration is what creates the planning board. It also creates the town board and town positions. But for our purposes, we're only editing the planning board section.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
Based on the agenda, and I'm just asking, it says the zoning ordinance, town code chapters 1 and 2 should still be under a public hearing and keep closed out on the zoning public hearing. Do we need to reopen a public hearing for these next 2 issues in case someone wishes to speak? I'm just trying to make a point of order.
That's a good technicality, so yes, just to be safe, redundant, but yes.
Okay. I'll now pass into a public hearing. Oh, that's good. I appreciate it. Input.
I don't see anybody online. We can just discuss the policy item, and also if you have any other questions or comments on this chapter,
Anybody have any,
or both chapters.
comments or questions? Mary? If not, I'll declare so. Public hearing, all for motion.
And one point of clarification, the planning board membership, we would just, it already is stating as 8 members. So we would just, if you choose to approve it, it would be as presented.
All promoted to approve the statement.
So when we read chapter 1,
Yes, we do them separate.
and we can mark through edits as changed,
As,
or it-
as
as
presented,
presented.
yes.
So it'd be two, approve the edits as presented,
Yes, ma'am, for both of them.
and then the edits as changed will be marked through.
Right, because that was only for the zoning ordinance. Because we made those changes.
I'll go through chapter 1, general provisions. The Board of Commissioners moves to approve the edits as presented. Town Code, chapter 1, general provisions. The town of North Wilkesboro deems the proposed amendments to be consistent with the town of North Wilkesboro's comprehensive plan dated June 5th, 2018. And any other applicable plans. The proposed amendments are supportive of the following plans' purposes. Establish the legal foundation for zoning and subdivision changes, guide future land use related relationships, and provide predictability for private sector development. The proposed text amendments are reasonable and in the public's best interest, which it supports the adopted comprehensive plan.
Okay, here's a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry to be picky.
No, go right ahead. We need to
The state,
be.
this 160D state stuff is so particular. I would ask Commissioner Day to restate, she used the word relationships instead of the word regulations.
Oh,
And I just want to make sure that that's been properly clarified.
thank you, Michael.
Okay, that correction made.
I believe so. Do I need to redo it, or are we good?
I think we're good.
Okay,
Yes, as long as it was noted.
thank you.
Second. I have a motion and a second. Any other clarifications, comments, or questions? If there are none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those that sign, motion carries. All right. Do we need to go out of this public hearing and go back into another one for the next time?
Well, we did a public hearing for both chapters.
Okay.
So all we need is then for a motion for chapter 2 administration.
Okay, so we don't need to go back into another public hearing.
No, I discussed both of them during the initial public hearing.
Appreciate the help and
Yes, sir.
we'll get through this. What else you got, Mary?
A motion for chapter 2.
All right, I need a motion for chapter 2.
I'll just read this off.
Yes, sir. And it's as presented.
I would like to make a motion to approve the edits as presented for Town Code Chapter 2 Administration. The Town of North Wilkesboro deems the proposed amendments to be consistent with the Town of North Wilkesboro's comprehensive plan dated June 5th, 2018, and any other applicable plans. The proposed amendments are supportive of the following plans' purposes. Establish the legal foundation for zoning and subdivision changes, guide future land use related regulations, and provide predictability for private sector development. The proposed text amendments are reasonable and in the public's interest because it supports the adopted comprehensive plan.
Okay. I've got a motion, I need a second.
I'll second that, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions, or clarifications from Mary? Being none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All right, motion carries. Thank you very much. Ready? What else you got there?
So we got one more item on 160D
Okay,
that we're going to, item E.
do we need to go into the public hearing?
No, sir. What the action for you tonight is to call for the public hearing. So tonight we can do discussion, as well as call for the public hearing. So, in the packet we gave out to everyone, there is a list of all the policy discussion points. I've highlighted some that you might need to take. And then also, I would like to give you the update on the schedule too for the next month or two. So, if you'd like, I'll jump on to the schedule real quick. As I mentioned with the zoning ordinance, we're gonna have to bring back the floodplain section only. It is dispersed throughout the zoning ordinance, but what you'll be considering would be just the floodplain. And then the other item is chapter 5 we pulled because the building codes needed to correct several of those and update those. And there may also be some floodplain aspects in that chapter. And additionally, we have another item for discussion on that chapter later on in the agenda. So several things for chapter 5. But for purposes of tonight, I've got before you Town Code Chapter 16, which is our subdivisions ordinance, and then also the standalone wireless communications ordinance. I believe we discussed it in our last meeting. That will deeper and give you all the different policies, kind of what was updated. There was mostly updates to 160, but I did notate there were several changes that were policy choices. Now the planning board would approve all of these policy changes, but at the end of the day, you as the governing body would be the one that would adopt it. So, if you want to look through them and let me know if you've got some questions. And I also included, luckily we were doing Zoom for the planning board, so I could pull up all these pictures for them. But I went ahead and printed them for you because with the wireless communications ordinance and cell phone towers, it gets very complicated, and I wanted to try to have it as clear as possible for everybody to see what the different types of examples essentially would be.
So that's now the major matters, so it's all we put the two.
Yes, sir. And then if you wanted to discuss any of the specific items,
After discussion.
yes, sir. And we need to decide if we want to have a public hearing at a work session on May 27th, or if you'd like to have a meeting.
May 27th is the night where you're handling the manager's evaluation, is that correct?
Yes.
There might be a lot of discussion how to agree on that process, I would think.
Yeah, I want to give you guys options, both dates, give us enough time to do the appropriate advertising. So it's really up to the agendas and what you guys would like to do going forward.
But there may not be that much discussion on the subdivisions and the wireless communication.
I'm not so sure that we can't do it on the 27th, because I think the public hearing is going to be pretty much like it was tonight, just, the one question I do have is that, Commissioner Palmer, last time we spoke, had a concern about distance from towers to property owners. Did you make that change?
I did not make a change. I wanted to get a recommendation from you all. I wanted to up it with a conditional, special use permit. We have to alert all adjacent property owners. Now, of course, we can go above and beyond that, alert a farther reach. So with the current ordinance, I believe it's 300 feet. And if you would, we could look at making that larger and verify if there's anything else we need to add.
I know Commissioner Palmer had some concerns about that, especially with the new 5G towers being implemented. So, do you have any contract? Any comment about that, Andrew? How you feeling about that?
Well, I mean, most people may not care. Me personally, if they were building a cell phone tower near me, I probably won't be aware of it. You said that some places be 500 feet.
But it's up to your preference. With the special use permit, we just have to do adjacent property.
I mean, if the others wanted to make it bigger, I would be okay with it, but I know it's not like something a lot of people are interested in, so.
And I did want to point out in those pictures, I did some more research today, the movement for getting, and this is just what I've seen, is not maybe the best accurate statement, but 5G towers are actually going to be more of your small wireless cell installations, which is on the, I believe, first page. So that's what you're gonna see on your light poles, you're gonna see on, telephone poles, it's gonna be a box, a ground, you're gonna see different installations versus towers potentially. And that's just how they've been done in the larger cities to make sure there's adequate service. It doesn't mean a new tower won't be built, but that is, it seems to be the movement that this industry is going towards.
So you're saying the 5G units will be small, not readily seen.
Well, they still may be seen, that's where we would need some kind of regulations on them, and I put that as a thinking point going forward. They can be very, if you've got a really nice decorative light pole, they can kind of obstruct the beauty of that. But what the 5G network, from my understanding is it has to essentially, how can I say it? At the marketplace, if you get a really large crowd, essentially it would overwhelm the signal on the towers. But by having one of these small cell installations, you would be able to adequately serve a large group of people. So that's a movement that I've started seeing with this industry. That doesn't mean we still won't have a tower submitted here and there. It's really gonna depend on our area and our service providers as well as what work for them. I want to make you all aware of that, because that's what I saw in Somerville before I was leaving. That was the next cell phone installation we were seeing.
So my understanding, not from what you're saying, but what I've read, in the past, and that I could be wrong, but your older technology towers, the wavelength, the frequency that they're using goes further. But with 5G, which gives you faster download speeds and things like that, it doesn't go as far. So they need more towers around town on the top of power poles and things like that so that it works. That's kind of why it's like that.
Right, so I wanted to kind of have this as like a faint placeholder, because this may start, coming up. Like I said, new technology, the new ways of these things being done.
Mayor, if I could make a comment on this, the one thing I asked the board to remember, and I might ask Robbie to correct me if I get something wrong, but movement in the public safety industry is to use 5G and other Wi-Fi internet-enabled technologies to improve public safety response. There's a thing nationwide called FirstNet that is actually provided by the private providers that essentially gives first responders first access to all this brand new broadband technology. And then the private providers get to use it for their own purpose when there is an emergency going on. So I would ask that we consider to weigh our regulations along with the need to do our part to contribute to this public safety network of technology. Robbie, did I say that right about FirstNet?
Yes, you're correct. Basically, what it does is hypothetically, Carl Best, where we have so many people here in town, it's when you're all in town, again, get a phone call through. The first responders and police officers, firefighters, EMS on this FirstNet system. It's all the same cell phone system. It's just our phones will take priority over theirs. So if Joe Blow over here is talking to his mom, wishing her happy birthday, but I've got all the 911 communication system because there's a fire or fire being killed or something. My call will take precedence over this. That's just an example of one thing. The other is also the computers and the cars. Their computer-aided dispatch systems will take precedence over other people, watching videos and things like that, watching YouTube or whatever. But they'll get precedence over that, using that to respond to calls.
this ordinance currently is not regulating the small wireless cell installations. The only thing that I put in here as a placeholder was the definition of them, and then also that we cannot regulate them within a private stadium, recreation facility, or like internally. So I have not added any regulations to those items, so they could come in tomorrow, and we don't have anything in place.
And I'm sorry, I can say this too. I do know that, Carolina West has signed a deal with Sony Ericsson to start 5G installations. I don't know if we do, but I know they have signed an agreement with them.
It's kind of a food for thought for something that may be coming forward in the near future.
So you have to do some kind of different thing for that.
I would have to research more. I focus mostly on the 160B for this section, but essentially there is legislation adopted that the state has approved. So we just need to make sure that we're in line with that and we're not overstepping the boundaries. So we might be able to approve an aesthetic design versus placement or something like that. That might be an example to look into.
So for now, all we need to do is call for a public hearing.
Yes, and we'll focus on the old school cell phone towers.
They brought up, either the main meeting or the children, most people stop.
How many years that came up? I'm not mindful, I think we could do it. So, but
There's, Mr. Mayor, make a motion that we call for a public hearing for, the subdivision ordinance, Town Code Chapter 16 subdivision, and the wireless communication ordinance for May 27th, 2020.
have a motion. Second. Okay, motion in a second, all those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those like sign, thank you, motion carried. Okay, what else, Meredith?
That was it for me. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
I think I'll still be around. But I'll let you present that.
Okay. All right. That gets us through D, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right, next one is demolition bond policy. First discussion.
So Meredith said it right. She's also a staff resource on this matter as well as Danny, and I think it's going to take all three of us to sort of get through this one because it's pretty technical. We've talked about this a little bit before. It's not a matter I think we're going to solve tonight. There's an administrative element and the policy element. And tonight we're just talking about the administrative element. And that is my proposal that we update the town code so that it doesn't conflict with itself anymore. Because right now, there's two different sections of the town code that deal with a demolition bond, and they don't say the same thing. And so what I'm proposing tonight is that we amend the town code, and this will also require a public hearing, to strike the section that is listed in italics at the top of your agenda that reads, in all cases of removal or demolition of the building or structure, a good and sufficient bond in the sum of $500 shall be posted by the property owner or by his or her contractor at the time of application for a permit to ensure complete removal or demolition, including all rubble and debris. Failure on the part of the property owner or his or her contractor to completely demolish, remove, and clear the premises after 30 days notice by the building inspector shall be called for forfeiture of the bond. And the reason I'm suggesting we strike that is because $500 simply isn't enough security for us for a big demolition project. Instead, I suggest that we stick with, at least for now, the policy that a previous board passed a few years ago, that says the bond should be worth the cost of the project. And so I'm recommending that we replace the language in the code with, in all cases of removal or demolition of the building or structure, a good and sufficient bond equivalent to the cost of the demolition be posted by the property owner, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what I'm asking for tonight. And at a future date, we'll come back and talk about whether we want to move the policy. In the big package of information that we handed out tonight is some preliminary information on how the insurance industry bonds people and sells bonds and the different kind of products that they offer to contractors and tradespeople. And so we'll find out some more information like that and bring that back to you so that we can make an educated decision about what we want to do going forward. But for now, I recommend that we amend the town code to get rid of this conflict. Any questions?
I've got a few questions. Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Not trying to, I don't want to make it more complicated. I don't want to make it more complicated, I just have questions. I think we definitely need to make the thing the way you're saying so that it protects the town. We need to make sure that we keep it user friendly for the citizens and businesses using it, so they're encouraged to demolish things that need to be demolished. So with that being said, regarding, and I know that we're want to pass this and not change the policy, not list off some questions. Regarding did you get to find out, do we need some sort of documents when someone wants to get bonded? Does the town have to provide a paper to that person so they can take it to the bonding agent?
I think that some of the information that we handed out tonight addresses that question. But I can't remember, Andrew, I'm sorry, I can't remember.
I guess my thing is, like, even if we do something tonight, we need to make it so that when they come to us, that it doesn't have to be a runaround. It's just, here, if they need a paper, here's a paper, you need to go get it, you know?
I presume permit application would probably be sufficient, but we'll double check that.
And I'm a little concerned, is there an amount that cannot be bonded if we were to pass it the way it is tonight? Like, say if somebody had a project that's $5,000, can they go get bonded for $5,000? That was one of the things the other guy was saying, that they don't want bond over 10,000. Is that true?
It depends on the provider. Some providers will provide a bond for as low as $2,000. And so, like I said, you know, insurance, whether you can buy insurance, depends on a lot of factors. And so I imagine it's different across the industry about who and how much they'll bond for. Which is why we want to find out a little bit more about those industry practices before we make the recommendation.
Yeah, I just want to, I guess, clarify, if we pass it the way it is tonight, that people can go do what they need to do without having to write you guys a bunch of emails.
Well, so the case in particular that we're talking about, they will fall into the old policy. So I don't think this change will be a burden to them at all.
I'm talking about people.
Yeah, but new people, you know, I imagine that if it's I'm just gonna pull a number out of here. If it's a $10 million job, the bond is probably a pretty significant cost. And it might make it harder for folks to find, you know, a construction company to do that job. But I imagine that if you're doing a big construction job that costs $10 million, you're gonna hire a professional firm who knows what they're doing, and is gonna have that included in their, you know, their bid.
I'm more concerned about the opposite side. So if it's like some guy needs $2,000 or $3,000, that he can get it without having to. Because I'm afraid, my point is like, if it's too much, they just make you on. I'm not messing with that. And, but it sounds like maybe we can just pass it the way it is and keep it that way and it'll be fine. Is that kind of what you think?
We really don't have enough, we really don't have enough examples of demolition permits to really say very much about what the sort of typical, you know, current demolition job looks like in the town. And yeah, there might be some jobs small enough that they might not need they might not be able to buy a bond because the company wouldn't insure for that small amount. And in that case, under the language proposed here, we sort of have to make an administrative judgment about what to let that person do. But most demolition jobs, I imagine, would cost enough that they fall into the threshold that they'd be able to go and get covered for that job.
Well, so basically, you're just trying to clean up the ambiguity that we currently have in this policy, correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Need a motion?
Motion to call for a public hearing, please. Yeah. Since it's a town code change,
We're gonna call for it on June 8th.
please.
I'm afraid I'll miss this. Mr. Mayor, I would like to make a motion that we call for a public hearing. For an intro. For a public hearing on June 8th, 2020, for the proposed change to the town code regarding the demolition bond policy.
Okay. I have a motion in a second. Is there any discussion that anybody wants to have at this time? I know there'll probably be some in the public area. If not, all those in favor, signify by stating aye. Opposed, like sign. Opposed, motion carries. Thank you very much. Okay. All right.
I guess I have one quick thought, Wilson. Sure. Just, whenever you do those changes, if there's a paper, if you find out that we need a document, just get that thing.
I appreciate that you're cleaning this up. Everybody.
Thanks for your work on it.
Okay, let's move on to G, I guess it is, yeah.
Greg, if you would mind pulling the PowerPoint up. Remember to share your screen so that can do it.
This is proposed budget and some supplementary speaking presentation.
All right, so I'll just sort of start off with a moment of levity. So this is the most stressful day for town and city managers of the whole year. The day that they present their proposed budget to the board. It's always one of those things that can either go really well or it can go really poorly. So I'm hoping that my presentation can go really well. I've got a PowerPoint up on the screen that Mary is going to start here shortly. But before I get started, I want to thank Connie, who's online, for all her work pulling this together. She not only put the budget together, compiling the numbers, projecting the revenues, and making our expenses and our revenues balance, but she also put it together in a format that you'll see in the firebound book that we distributed tonight, which isn't her natural preference. She likes doing it another way, but I asked her to do it this way, and she did it. And I appreciate all her work. So Connie, if you're listening, thank you so much. And, appreciate all that you do. I also want to thank the board for spending so much time and attention giving me guidance on what the budget should include. I consider both the the board retreat and the budget workshop to be budget-related work sessions. And as you can see on the first slide, we'll go to the first slide there. Although she's having some technical issues. That's okay. You all spent close to 14 hours together giving me direction on this budget. So I really appreciate that. The proposed budget is higher than last year. Last year's budget was a very austere budget. This year's budget is just a regular austere budget. As last year, we had no idea how the pandemic was going to play out. This year, although there's still risk, we know a little bit more about how things are looking in the midst of the pandemic. And so the economy actually behaved differently than we thought it was going to. We thought that with everyone staying home, there'd be a huge drop in sales tax, but in reality, there was an increase in sales tax. We thought that our interest income would stay the same, but in reality, it dropped because the federal government is using low interest rates as a way to stimulate the economy. Therefore, because the economy is doing okay, reasonably stable, and the federal government has given us stimulus dollars, we can balance this budget with no change to our property tax rate and no change to any general fund fees. So I think that's a good thing for the people of North Wilkesboro who need some financial certainty at the moment as they set their budgets for the coming year. There will be no proposed change to their property tax rate or to general fund fees. The proposed general fund budget is about 6.5% higher than it was last year. And the water and sewer budget is about 4.5% higher than it was last year. With all that said, the pandemic still affects what the budget looks like. It affects our revenue sources. It affects the programs that we're going to provide. But it wasn't it wasn't all gloom and doom. Finally, the main operational budget has no effects. Well, it's got an effect on one service, but other than this one service, which I'll share with you here shortly, there were no significant impacts on service levels. So we'll still have our same response time, we'll still have our same number of employees, we'll still provide all the services that we have in the past. We did not have to cut or reduce any services in this budget, except one. And that's one that we talked about before, and that is getting rid of the convenience center out there behind the ABC store. That was becoming too expensive and too much of a nuisance. And so we talked here before about getting rid of it, and that's what we're going to do. So that's the one service that will be affected. But of course, residents of North Wilkesboro will still have their rollout recycle bins that they can use to recycle. And if you discover that your one rollout recycle bin is inadequate, we'll sell you another. And my family and I are probably going to buy another one because we've just built ours up. Okay. But with all that said, the budget still wasn't sufficient enough to accomplish most of the priorities that you as a board set out during those two meetings that I alluded to earlier. To accomplish those, we needed to do something a little different and a little extra. And so what that is a supplemental spending plan that I'm going to talk about tonight, and that we talked about before, which takes money from our federal stimulus, the sale of our properties over the past year, some of our reserve funds, and uses it to make progress on some of your priority projects. So I'm calling that the supplemental spending plan. And you can't really tell the story of our budget this year and next without including it. So that'll be an addition to the budget story this year. Next slide, please. All right, so I'm not going to go over our revenues line by line, but if you want to, it's in the book. I don't know exactly what page, but somewhere towards the front, there's a line by line accounting of all our revenue sources. I'm just going to cover the major revenues. As you can see, our property tax went up by a nominal 4% this year. Our sales tax went up quite significantly by 18%. However, our hospital money went up by a nominal 2% increase. However, our utility franchise taxes and our interest on investments are projected to drop. And so we've had some positive news and some negative news, and it all balances out in the end, but there were good and bad pressures on our revenue sources this year. You can see that ARP is included in our revenue projection, and the presence of ARP money, which the state just notified us should come next week, prevented us from having to use fund balance. If we didn't have that ARP money, we would have either had to make hard choices on our services or dip into our savings account. ARP money prevents us from having to do that. Next slide, please. Again, I'll just go over the major general fund expenses, particularly the expenses that put pressure on the budget. So a few of the pressures of the general fund budget felt this year was an increase in the cost of employee health insurance. We budgeted about a 10% increase, but we're still negotiating what that actual increase will be. We hope it'll be less than that. I'm feeling good that it'll probably be less than that, but I don't know by how much less yet. But we budgeted 10%. We also, again, budgeted a 2.5% cost of living adjustment for our employees. You can see that that's a pretty expensive thing. That costs over over $109,000, $33,000 more than last year. And it unfortunately doesn't even keep our employees level with the consumer price index. Now, the consumer price index is an imperfect measure, but it's the only one I know about. things are more affordable here, housing and so forth, and so, the Wilkes County Consumer Price Index would probably be under 2.6%, probably closer to 2. But nationwide, it's 2.6%, and so the 2.5% would keep them more or less even with, the cost of living that's going on in the nation right now. Outstanding debt service has gone up significantly since last year because we've added the cost of the 4 police cars that we financed last year to our debt service account. And then finally, we're going to pay cash for 2 new police cars in the current year. And that's in addition to, that's something that's additional on top of last year's budget. Okay, next slide, please. There's your general fund budget broken out by departments, just so you all can review that quickly and everyone watching online can see how the general fund money is distributed. And of course, this is in the booklet that we have. Any questions or comments so far? All right, next slide, please. This is just kind of hard to read in the page, I'm sorry about that. This is our general fund capital improvement plan for the next 9 years. These are the projects that we're going to try to budget for in the coming year. You can see in the, probably can't see because it's kind of hard to read, but in the FY22 column, you'll see all the debt service that we're going to pay in the current year. It includes, all the capital items we're going to pay for in the coming year. They won't all have debt service because they won't all be financed. You can see, for example, it's got $67,000 in the police vehicle sale there. We're going to pay cash for those, so that's why it only appears in 1 year. We're also going to pay cash to replace the Woodlawn HVAC system. That's a requirement of our contract with the daycare that's there, that we maintain the equipment there, so we're going to do that this year. And then above that, we'll see the debt service payments for the 3 outstanding finance projects that we've got in the general fund. And you can see what we project we'll need to spend in the coming years to do some of the projects that we've talked about and that are needs, that are needs in the company. Next slide. All right, let's pivot to the water sewer fund. The water sewer fund has fewer revenues. It's got about 4 different sources of revenues, and only one of them is really all that substantial, and that's, of course, the fees that we charge for the water that we sell, both to our in-town and wholesale customers. We project that we'll bring in about 2.6 million of water revenues this year. That includes the proposed rate increases. And just to review, that is another 2% increase for in-town customers and a 9-cent increase for wholesale customers. Our wholesale rates will be, $2.28 per 1,000 gallons once this increase goes into effect. That's, I think, 17 cents less than 7 or 17 cents less than Wilkes-Barre, and a whole $1 less than Pelham. So even though we've raised our prices a little bit over the last 2 years, there's still a great margin for our wholesale customers. As you can see, the reimbursement from Wilkes-Barre has been taken off this year's budget because that project is complete. And so there will be a corresponding elimination of that expense. So if the revenue bottom line looks a little smaller, don't worry, the expense bottom line will also be a little smaller. So we are going to allocate ARC funds to the water and sewer budget, but they will be our contingency funds. I think we can afford to stay in the black using our own dollars as long as nothing goes wrong. But if something goes wrong, we'll have those ARC dollars there as a backstop for that. And then finally, you can see that the other revenues that we collect in the water and sewer fund have gone down a little bit. I attribute that partly to, the, moratoriums and so forth that have prevented us from collecting, all our penalties. I think the effects of that will roll over into the next year. All right, next slide. The first two budget pressures on the water sewer fund are the same as the general fund. Increased employee health costs and cost of living for water sewer employees. Those numbers, I just noticed a mistake there. So it's not $109,000 for the water sewer employees. There's fewer of them, so it's less than that. And I can get that number for you, but it's still a pressure on my budget. And then finally, we're also going to pay cash for two new trucks that they need over in the water department. All right, next slide. And there is their budget broken out by department. Any questions or comments so far? Again, there's much more detailed information on all this in your. Next slide, please. All right, so the water sewer capital improvement plan is actually the one that I would suggest you pay more attention to, because we have, as you know, a number of several large capital projects in the pipeline that we're going to have to start paying for soon. This year, we'll have to pay our closing costs for our loan with the state of North Carolina for the water tank. Next year, probably, we'll have to pay the closing costs for the loan for the Aquaflow upgrade. And so those both appear as expenses here on the spreadsheet. And then every year after that, for the next 10 years, we'll have to pay our debt service on both of those projects. But below the top section there, you can see a whole list of other projects on there that we're forecasting a need for in the coming years. And we'll have to find some dollars to pay for those expenses. Fortunately, as you can see on there, some of the big debt payments that we've been paying for the last few years will be coming off in the next few. And so that'll free up some money to pay for the next round of capital improvements. I've noticed another error on here that we're going to have to fix, and that is you can see replace 99 Chevy 1-ton truck and replace 06 Ford F-250 trucks with payments of about $7,000 for the next 5 years. That was when we were going to lease them, but staff and I decided that we pay cash for those and not lease those. So that should be just one number in the FY22 column instead of 5. So I'll correct that before the final version. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so you probably noticed by now that I got through all that information without talking one bit about the priorities that you actually need during the board retreat and reiterated during the budget workshop. And that's because the austere budget doesn't really have a lot committed to new projects. But like I said earlier, we're fortunate that we've got this federal stimulus dollar, that we've got some savings, that we've got proceeds from our sales of our properties to do some of these priority projects. And they're projects in the water system realm. We already talked about that a little tonight. That was moving forward. In the police fire facilities realm, the traffic calming realm, the paving and stormwater realm, and the beautification and streetscape. Next slide, please. So my supplemental spending plan, made possible, of course, like I just said, by federal stimulus dollars, both the CARES Act and part proceeds from the sale of our properties and reserve funds. We use it to make progress toward your priorities. And with all that said, the federal government hasn't exactly come out with all the guidance on how the HARP funds can be used. But with the little information that they've shared so far, with the sort of intent of the legislation that we heard about back when it was being discussed, I think all of our projects will qualify. But, you know, small 1% chance that they might come out with some guidance saying you can't use it for that, in which case we'll have to refund. But I'm fairly confident that we're going to do for that. Next slide, please. All right, so here's your supplemental spending plan. Kind of small, but you've got this hard copy in your desk. A couple of these items on here, we've already approved. The splash pad and the Ninth Street milling and appraisal. By the way, we're just gonna start tomorrow morning, so if you park on Ninth Street, Michael, find another place to park tomorrow, because they're gonna be out there.
Single.
Okay, there you do. As well as toll road sidewalk repair and Main Street highway improvements. You can see here the fourth column from the left, lists the priority areas for each of these proposed projects. And then the third column lists the source of funds for each of those projects. And so I'll give you a minute to read over this proposal and offer any comments if you have. You can see from, if you read the second column from the right, that to make this money available to spend, so when we're ready to spend it on a project, we'll have to take some administrative actions to appropriate the money, and those differ depending on what the source of it is. And so those actions are described in the second column from the right. But if you look at the top three, you'll see that you're going to take some of those actions tonight. Our next item is going to ask you to approve a few budget amendments that will appropriate that money and make it really useful. Okay, next slide, please, Mary. If you're worried about whether we're going to have any money left after doing all that, the answer is yes. And this sheet shows the balance of each of those funds after we use it for the project that I proposed. You can see that some of them we max out. I'm proposing that we use, for example, all $267,000 of the money we got from the sale of our properties for the fire truck. I'm proposing that we max out our first out refunds and so forth. But most of them will still stay in the black. And in fact, one of them increases. But one of the things I'm proposing with the supplemental spending plan is that we take the various pots of money that we use for our grants and our loans and put it all in one pot, and then distribute it on a first come, first served basis up to that amount. Now, we haven't given it, the one exception will be the facade grant. I'm recommending that we keep the facade grant sort of separate on its own because it's the most active. Those other grants, we haven't got very many applicants over the last few years. We hope we can generate some more activity in those grants. But until then, I think it's wise to sort of keep that money all in one place. And if one of those grants becomes more popular than the other, then we can talk about moving it around. But for the moment, I recommend putting it all together. And so the balance of one of those funds, therefore, will increase from 30,000 to 70,000. But again, this sheet here shows the balance of each of those funds. We still have a fairly healthy capital reserve fund, unrestricted fund balance, general fund project funds, and the various other sources of funding in the water sewer realm, including our retained earnings. Any comments or questions on that? All right, so that, I think that's it. Okay. That's the conclusion of my presentation. The only action I ask that you take tonight is to call for a statutorily required public hearing for June 8th on the proposed FY 21-22 budget. The supplementary spending plan doesn't require a public hearing. The actions for that will come as needed in the future.
Okay, here's the request of the manager. motion to approve.
Mayor, I make a motion, we call for a public hearing on the FY fiscal year 2022 budget on June 8th, 2021.
And have a motion to call for public hearing to approve all the stuff that Wilson went over on the budget and need a second, please.
I'll second that, Mayor.
Thank you. Any questions before we go?
Is there any more discussion on budget stuff?
But we can have it tonight, or we can wait till the 8th, once you close the public hearing, whatever your preference. The one additional thing I'll add is that now that I've presented this budget to you, I'm going to post it on our website tomorrow, along with a press release saying that it's been posted for public view. That's a statutory requirement, so it's not just something that I decided to do to be transparent, although I believe in transparency, but we're doing this because the law requires us to post it. And it'll be available for public consumption after tomorrow.
Would it be more appropriate to do it tonight so people can see it for the public hearings?
Well, the public hearing is a month from now, so it'll be available for a month. And this action just calls for the public.
Okay, motion in the second. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Those last time, none opposed, thank you very much. Okay. Wilson, that concludes you.
Yeah, one more, so the one I just, the action I just alluded to, is to approve 3 budget amendments. That will initiate, a couple of the projects that are listed on the supplemental spending plan, including, budget amendment number 13, which is the splash pad. Budget amendment number 14, which is, the housekeeping item that we should have done a few weeks ago when we originally approved the power bill money to repay the grid. And then finally, amending the revenue budget for the Prescott project. So it's a housekeeping item.
Do these amendments need to be made separately?
I think you could make them all in one motion. Kind of just texted me, so let me make sure I got that right before we approve it. It's saying she lost the video. No correction.
Mayor, I make a motion
Thank you.
that we approve the 3 budget amendments listed in our, with our attachments related to the supplemental spending.
And the motion. Need a second.
Second.
Thank you. Motion is second. Any other comments or discussion? Or any questions? There being none, all those in favor, signify by saying aye. Those last time, opposed, motion carries. All right. That brings us down to mayor and commissioner topics. Board members can bring up topics not listed on the agenda for discussion. Shall follow. Anybody have?
First, I wanted to say thank you to the ABC schools for the donation to the police department. That was nice and a good thing. I'm still a little confused about the budget thing. If I have any questions about that, then it'd be better to do it then. So it'd be better to do it next one.
Well, do you think that your questions might result in a change to what's presented?
That's what yeah. But it's not appropriate at all. I said next month, I thought it would be more appropriate tonight.
I think it is appropriate now, as a matter of fact, because next month any changes might, sort of cause, it's like cause some chaos.
Did you get to look into at all the, how much it would cost to raise the starting, to pay for just starting officer positions at the police department?
I wanted to present this budget as recommended before I sent that out. So I still plan on doing that. But since it's not part of my proposal, I didn't bring it here tonight.
Robbie, do you know how many jobs of like starting level officers that would affect?
So exactly what
If we were to try to raise the pay, the starting pay for officers to help you with like job recruitment and retainment of officers at the starting level, how many jobs would that affect if you did that for like the base starting pay?
it would be since the last time we had a raise, probably 5 years, over that 4 years.
No, my question is,
If you don't raise it for everybody, people we hire tomorrow will be making more than we got here in your 5 years.
I mean, I don't know if I explained it correctly. So if you raise it for people that are already there, but they're still at that base level of pay,
Yes.
and for new people that come that would be at that base level,
So how many officers?
yes, sir.
Just about every officer. So,
How many do you know? Control? 16, so if you, how far below where you think we are, was it like $1,500 or something, if I remember correctly?
2, 3,
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say we're about 1,500 to 2,000. And then, the other part, but pay wise, it's about 1,500.
But if so, if you multiply 1,500 times 16 officers, that's about roughly how much money it'd be every year extra, right?
It would really be more like 2,100 or 2,200 because you've got to factor in the cost, the multiplier on the benefits and so forth.
I don't know if anybody else on the board is, I'm still in favor of doing that. Every day on TV, we're seeing things where officers are in more dangerous situations, and I understand what Bill was saying, and Connie was saying, the guys on our trash trucks, they have a hard job, they have, a lot of things that they do, but with what I've heard about the industry and just the risk they're taking, I think we need to be in a position to recruit the best officers we can. And I think it's a liability not to be there. So I wanted to bring that up again. Maybe tonight was the time to do it, but I don't understand all the way things work, so I apologize.
So I'll send out that information to the board. And what I'll do is, on the night of the public hearing, I'll bring information on some trade-offs. How sources of funds or cuts in other areas that we would make to be able to afford that increase if the board wants to go forward with it.
And the other thing, I reached out to the Books Literacy Group to see what they do. And they told me that they're located in the Way Building. About 75% of their clients are North Wilkesboro, not necessarily city limits, but zip code. They teach people how to read, who don't know how to, that are adults. And they do a 2-week camp at our housing every summer for the kids there. They were asking for $2,000. I would feel good about giving them 2,000 or at least 1,000 to support what they're doing. I think it is beneficial to North Wilkesboro. And that's the only other thing I have, if anybody else would be willing to.
I would like to comment on the police wage increase. I would love for every person who works in the town of North Wilkesboro to be able to get a real cost of living increase, not the 2.6,
2.5.
2.5 that they were giving this year. But the thing is, I believe Connie pointed out in our retreat that the only reason our budget is going to be balanced is because of the art funds. Is that a correct
Yes,
statement?
ma'am.
And so if the art funds come in this year and then the 21-22 budget. Is that correct? So that's 2 years we're getting art funds, and after that, we fall back on what we have, and we would not be able to meet that, standard we had set for our employees, and we'd have to go back to, we would have to raise taxes, we would have to make other changes to try to, meet that pay scale. So, although I would love to be able to give more, the thing that I feel we need to do is, it's more responsible to be able to live within our means. And the art funds are great, and they're allowing us some freedom this year, and next year. But unfortunately, we would have to do something differently than what we've worked through with our own work session and our recommendations from our staff.
Anybody else?
All right, if there's no other,
So Mayor, the last piece of information that we sent to you in this extra packet was the motion to go into closed session. So we can maybe take a break before we move to closed session.
I had an actual thing for the commissioner thing. The commissioner topic, sorry, Gary. We talked about this a little before, and I was gonna bring it up because I feel like now's the time to bring it up. If we were to actually decide to do it for, roughly 10 months away or whenever. But, thinking about the budget stuff, I know, basically I'm talking about, I think Norfolk Square should do the occupancy tax. I know we don't have a lot of hotels and things, but I think it'd be nice if staff did some research to see how many places we do have now that would fall under that category, and, if there's any way to find out how much money it would have brought in, if it brought in an extra $5,000, that's five we didn't have. If a hotel was there to come to North Wilkesboro, it would really make a difference in our marketing budget. And I think it would be a good thing to set in place now. And I know that you have to go to the state to do that if we want to do it, so I wanted to bring it up. And on that same topic, I think that we should direct Wilson, in my opinion, to talk to Wilkesboro about us officially getting a seat on that TDA board, even if it was an ex officio seat or something. Because we do have a lot of things in North Wilkesboro that people come to see from a tourism standpoint. And that's pretty much what I wanted to bring up.
We have participated on the TDA board in the past. Wilkesboro.
They chose not to have us included.
Yeah, I spoke at their meeting back in March, and their mayor, did you watch the meeting? He said that they had been talking about, if we want that.
So the new model will essentially give us a non-voting seat before.
Yeah, we did have a voting seat. They did fund some things in town for us in the past, but they did change their mind about that. So non-voting seat.
Well, just tells you, it's just the informational seat, basically, give information about the time.
Well, I think with the non-voting seat, you could still meet and stuff.
Sure.
That's right. It's not a bad thing. I mean, North Wilkesboro, letting them know that we got this going on,
Yeah.
Public meeting,
yeah, you can go.
But the next officio seat would give us the opportunity to participate in, whether they got subcommittee. So, if they ask us, I'm going to send somebody. Because I think it's a good idea, and, that person will just have to use persuasion rather than a vote to try to get us some, recognition on that. But, that's sort of what they've offered right now. I've been, mentioning to Ken and others that, we'd like to have a voting seat. Obviously, we have to participate in the occupancy tax to even make a good faith argument for a voting seat, but if there's no objection, we can bring this information back and have a discussion on this.
Sounds good.
And
Thank you for your time on it.
Okay, need a motion to go into closed session. Okay. Let's take a little break.
So we need to read the.
Yeah, I think it'd be helpful if we read the motion.
Okay. Let's see.
Since there's a couple different means you can use to do a closed session. Clarify which one.
Mayor, I make a motion that we conduct a closed session according to General Statute 143-318, period 11, parentheses A, parentheses 3, to consult with an attorney employed or retained by the public body in order to maintain the attorney-client privilege between the attorney and the public body.
Okay, need a second. Second. Motion in a second. All those in favor, get up and have a break.